One stormy Sunday morning, a desperate crowd filled the massive hall of Holy Ground. Whispers rippled through the rows as the sujets raised their necks to catch the spirit of Pastor Kemi, popularly known as Papa See-It-All. Some said he could pierce threats into a person's soul, revealing secrets no one could ever know. Others swore that he has the power to speak directly with God. But today, something unsettling hung in the air. Just then, a scream echoed from the side of the hall. A lady named Jennifer, one of Papa See-It-All trusted members, rushed to the front with wide eyes and shaking hands. She did it again. Mama healed a cripple. The congregation erupted in cheers, but Esther, a quiet churchgoer who had attended for months, noticed something strange. She had seen this crippled man walking around the market just days before. Doubts clawed at her heart, but who will believe her? Papa See-It-All was powerful, untouchable. His followers will fight you just to protect him. His years back, Kemi had been a simple boy from a humble, God-fearing family. His family raised him to be honest, devoted, and to walk in the light. He would be shining the Hope Thyre Church, leading Sunday school, organizing prayer meetings, and singing in the choir. Everyone adored him, and some even said he was destined for greatness. But no one foresaw how his path would trace in such a dark direction. Years later, after struggling to build his ministry without suspects, Pastor Kemi attended a grand conference for pastors. There, he met several famous preachers who seemed to hold a secret power. The leader, Pastor Benjamin, pulled him aside. "You're trying to be godly, but you will never make an impact until you're willing to sacrifice." He talked about a special ceremony, one that will require a significant offering from him. At first, Kemi hesitated, but Pastor Benjamin promised him it would grant him the influence he desperately sought. Driven by his desire to succeed, he agreed. That night, he participated in a strange ritual, giving up his chance to ever have children as an offering. The pastors gathered around, chanting, while Kemi's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. When it was over, he felt an air power settled around her like a dark cloak. He couldn't explain it, but something had changed. After returning home from the conference, Kemi's fortune began to shift. People started flocking to his service, and soon the entire country heard of Papa See-It-All. His church began filling up with members from every corner of Africa and beyond. His fame grew, and with it his wealth. But this was only the beginning. Unknown to his followers, Pastor Kemi, the man they worshipped as Papa See-It-All, was far more than just a deceitful pastor. Beneath her human exterior lay an ancient, sinister secret. Pastor Kemi was a half-human and a half-serpent, a hybrid of darkness whose origin traced back to a mysterious underwater covenant he had entered after joining the cult. Every midnight, he would disappear from his luxurious mansion, leaving the world of mortals. Behind in the dead of night, he would shed his human form and transform into a creature with skills as dark as midnight. This transformation marked his journey to the underwater kingdom, where his true allegiance lay. Kemi would sleep silently into the river behind his mansion, vanishing beneath the water as if swallowed by the very earth itself. There, in the depth, he will join his occultic brothers, other pastors and prophets who had pledged themselves to the marine kingdom. There they shared twisted wisdom, dark strategies, and skills to keep the tide of darkness bound in deception. For Kemi, this was where he drew his power. The Marine Queen, a touring figure with serpentine features, bestowed upon his strength, vision, and the ability to see into the lives of his followers. But there was a price for this power. His soul, his humanity, perhaps most disturbingly his manhood. Kemi's sacrifice to the Marine Kingdom had left him impotent, a trade he had willingly made to gain authority and influence in the physical world. Back in his church, no one suspected a thing. To them, Kemi was a holy pastor, and they were oblivious of his midnight disappearances. His congregation continued to grow as people flocked from far and wide, desperate for miracle, healing, and deliverance. Those who sought his favor were willing to pay any price, from cash offering to livestock and precious family heirlooms. Kemi ministry has become a relentless machine swallowing people's wealth and hopes alike. Within months, he began implementing strange new practices. Each member was handed a mirror, which he called the Mirror of Life. This mirror, he will say in a commanding tone, this mirror is blessed by the Almighty Himself. Every morning, look into it, speak to it, and you will see part of your spirit that needs healing. His congregation cherished these mirrors, believing they were on a path to spiritual growth, but in reality, the mirrors were tools connected to by the marine world. Through them, Papa See-It-All could pierce into his members' lives, studying their weaknesses, secrets, and fears. One Sunday, Papa called a young woman named Favor to the front, a slight smile crossing her lips. Favor gasped, "How did you know?" The congregation erupted into a frenzy, marveling at Papa's ability to know every details of their lives. In truth, he has used his mirror to summon Favor's spirit in the night before, gathering all he needed to make the revelation sound divine. The church soon introduced holy water and miracle oil, with simple labels but sold at exorbitant price. Pastor Kemi will wave his hands over the items, claiming that they could cure any sickness, fix any marriage, and even bring financial blessings. When Esther saw a struggling mother give her last savings for a tiny bottle of miracle oil, she clenched her first feeling. Her suspicion deepened. The next Sunday, Pastor Kemi's voice echoed through the church as he scanned the congregation with piercing eyes, his gaze landing on a young man seated in a middle row. His name was Obi, a quiet, newly returned graduate who had just come back from overseas with his mother to visit Kemi's church, having heard of Papa See-It-All and his supposed divine revelations. Pastor Kemi's face lit up as he beckoned Obi forward. "Young man, please come forward." Obi hesitated, but his mother nudged him, whispering, "Go, could be your blessing." Obi stepped up to the front. Kemi raised his hand in what loomed like a gesture of divine revelation. She took a deep breath, then announced dramatically, "The Lord has revealed something troubling to me, my son." The congregation was silent. Hanging on every word, Kemi looked at Obi with a heavy gaze, shaking his head slowly. "Young man, your life battery is running dangerously low. I see darkness ahead if nothing is done." Obi felt his heart begin to pound like battery. He didn't understand, but he saw Kemi's brave expression. He swallowed nervously. "Papa, please, what does that mean?" Kemi placed a comforting hand on his shoulder and lowered his voice so that the tension in the air thickened. "It means, my son, that if something isn't done quickly, you won't live to see your 30s. Marriage and children, all of that will be lost to you unless you act now." Obi's face turned pale. His mother gasped, clutching her chest in fear. But Kemi continued, raising his hand as if bestowing hope on him. "The Lord has provided a solution. There is a way to renew your life battery, to ensure you live a long and prosperous life." He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing with intensity. "You must make a sacrifice, a powerful seed, something that cost you deeply, for the Lord blesses those who give from the heart." Obi's mother held him tight, her eyes wide with worry. What kind of sacrifice, Papa?" she stammered. Kemi nodded, as if he had expected the question. "The Lord has directed me," he said, his voice dropping to a hush, "that your son's life can be renewed with the sacrifice of a cow, not just any cow, but one that symbolizes a new life, strong, healthy, and without blemish." Obi's mind raced at the thought. He had heard of sacrifices before, but had never been asked to make one for himself. "Papa, I don't know where to get a cow now." Kemi waved her hand dismissively. "Do not worry, my son. The Lord understands. You need not to go out and find a cow yourself. You can simply convert this sacrifice into a seed. Give the amount and I will take care of the rest. The church has a way to handle these things. You just need to be obedient and trust in the word of the Lord." Obi's mother whispered frantically in his ear, urging him to comply. "Obi, don't delay. Just do what Papa Siatal says. Your life is worth more than any amount of money." Reluctantly, he agreed, pulling out his checkbook and writing a large sum of money. Kemi accepted the check with a smile of satisfaction. "My son, your obedience has pleased the Lord. Your life is now in God's hand, and He will reward you for your sacrifice." Relieved but still shaken, Obi returned to his seat, his mother clinging to him and thanking the pastor profusely. But what he didn't know was that Kemi had no intention of buying any cow or offering any sacrifice as she did with many others. He took the money straight to her ongoing project fund, adding it to the luxurious mansion he was constructing on the outskirts of town. This wasn't the first time he had used care tactics to squeeze offerings from his congregation, and it wouldn't be the last. Obi's experience was just one of many in Kemi's church. Esther watched from a distance as she gathered most stories like this. She saw the pattern and knew that this prophecy was nothing more than calculated lies to drain his followers financially. She began to find means to expose his evil doings, though she knew it wouldn't be easy. She prayed that her efforts would one day set people like Obi free, opening their eyes to the truth about Kemi's schemes. Esther's resolve strengthened, thrilled by her desire to protect innocent lives from falling into the same trap. Despite her growing doubts, Esther kept attending the church, quietly observing. Then one Sunday she noticed something that she couldn't ignore. An elderly man in a wheelchair rode up to the altar. Papa Siatal placed his hand on his forehead, murmuring a prayer. The man suddenly stood up, shaking with supposed new strength, while the congregation erupted in joyous shouts. Esther, however, recognized him from a street at market. He wasn't disabled at all. He was an actor paid to pretend for this miracle. Over time, Kemi had become one of the wealthiest men in the area, with a mansion filled with gold-plated furnitures, expensive cars, and personal staff. He called it a reward from God. But Esther knew that no blessing had yet arrived for her poor neighbors, who continued to give until they had nothing left. Amid all his schemes, Kemi wielded his power not only to deceive, but to control lives, even breaking up families for his own selfish desires. He took a particular interest in wealthy, influential women who attended his church, especially those he sensed could be easily manipulated. If he set his sight on a married woman, he would concoct visions and divine revelations that cast doubt upon her husband, creating chaos in the household. During one particular scandalous service, Pastor Kemi singled out a successful businesswoman named Mrs. Elizabeth. He called her to the front of the congregation, dramatically raising his hand as though he's receiving a divine message. "Sister Elizabeth," he declared, "the Lord is showing me a troubling vision, a dark cloud surrounding your household. Someone close to you, someone you trust deeply, is working against your blessings." As expected, Mrs. Elizabeth looked alarmed. Her eyes widened with shock and fear. "Pastor, who could it be?" she asked. Desperately eager to protect her fortune and her family, Kemi leaned in, lowering his voice to a solemn whisper. "It's your husband. I see his spirit entangled in the web of envy and greed, blocking your breakthrough," he added. "But fear not, Papa. See, it all is here to help you with my special guidance. I can break this cause over time." Kemi convinced Mrs. Elizabeth that her husband's supposed negative energy was the reason for her business struggles. He encouraged him to distance herself emotionally, assuring her that deliverance would come if she followed his instructions. What he didn't tell Mrs. Elizabeth was his real motive. He intended to draw her closer to him. Knowing she was vulnerable, he began sending her private messages inviting her to special prayer sessions at his mansion under the pretext of purging the spirit of her husband's supposed bad influence. This session, however, soon took different turn. Kemi manipulated Mrs. Elizabeth, feeding her flattering words and assuring of a life filled with blessings if she would satisfy his desires. In no time, Mrs. Elizabeth found herself entangled in an affair convinced that her loyalty to him would bring her divine favor. This pattern repeated with other wealthy women in the congregation. Kemi sowed seeds of doubt between husbands and wives. Esther, the young woman who had been investigating Kemi, grew increasingly disturbed as she learned of this manipulative tactics. This wasn't just a spiritual deception, it was a web of lies that destroyed families and tore relationships apart. Kemi's actions were beyond sinful, they were predatory. Another unsettling practice was that Kemi claimed she could bless any can of water, transforming it into a holy remedy for all problems, illness, and financial troubles for a fee. People will leave their cans of water in her office for prayers as often as possible and then acted whatever bad fate they had to their mouths. Sometimes, however, people will leave their cans of water in her office for prayers. Behind closed doors, Kemi will simply pour a pack of salt and sugar into each day. The salt and sugar created a slight change in taste, fooling congregants into believing the water was truly blessed. One evening, Esther overheard a conversation between two of Kemi's closest members, Felix and Linda, discussing the jerry can tricks. "Can you believe they are paying that much just for a dash of salt and sugar?" Linda laughed, shaking her head. Esther felt a surge of fear, but stood her ground, her heart filled with the courage to see her mission through. She knew Kemi's days of deception were numbered. The truth was out there, ready to be revealed, and there was no turning back. Now, another faithful night. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and courage, Esther decided to follow Kemi. She waited in the bush near the river behind Kemi's mansion, clutching her phone tightly, hoping to capture whatever dark secret lay hidden. The clock struck midnight. Esther saw Kemi emerge from his mansion. He moved gracefully towards the river, his steps almost gliding across the ground. Esther's heart raised as she watched Kemi at the riverbank. The prophet looked up at the sky and began chanting in a strange language, one that sounded ancient and unsettling. Then, before Esther's very eyes, Kemi's form began to change. His skin shimmered and scales emerged, covering his body as his legs melded together. Her eyes glowed as she slid silently into the water, disappearing beneath the surface with a splash. "Oh my God!" Esther gasped, barely able to process what she had seen. She realized then that Kemi was not just a fraud. He was something beyond human, something malevolent. Esther stumbled back, her mind racing. This truth was more terrifying than she could ever imagine. Kemi wasn't merely deceiving her congregation, he was manipulating them with powers that stained from the depth of a dark, occultic world. The next morning, Esther returned to the church, her spirit heavy but resolved. She knew now that her mission was not just to reveal Kemi's fraudulent practices, but to expose the dangerous forces he was harnessing. But Kemi's, aware of Esther's growing suspicion, took notes. His piercing gaze lingered on Esther during the service, his smile as sharp as a blade during the altar call that day. Kemi announced that he had a special blessing for one person in the congregation who was called to serve a divine mission. He fixed her gaze on Esther, who froze as Kemi called her forward. Esther, come forward. Kemi's voice was smooth, but laced with an undertone of menace. The Lord has shown me that you carry a heavy burden. Come, let Papa see I'll lift it from you. Esther's heart pounded, but she stepped forward, not wanting to reveal her fear. As Kemi laid a cold hand on her forehead, Esther felt a chilling sensation run through her body. She heard Kemi whisper in her ear, "You are trading dangerous waters, my child. Be careful, for some secrets are not meant to be uncovered." Esther swallowed hard, but refused to back down. She would continue her mission to expose Kemi, but she now knew the stakes were higher than she had imagined. There was no turning back now. Esther, courage became her guiding light as she continued to gather evidence against Kemi. With every passing day, she uncovered more layers of deception and dark manipulation, which confirmed that Kemi's reach went beyond. It was now clear to Esther that her mission was about more than just exposing Kemi's lies. It was about freeing innocent souls bound by Kemi's sinister practices. When Esther finally released her gathered recordings, photos, and testimonies to the media, the world was shocked. Reports spread like wildfire, exposing Kemi's deceitful miracles, staged healings, and occult connections. Congregants who had once revered him now relied with disbelief, feeling betrayed by the persons they once called Papa See-It-All. Many wept openly, mourning the years and money they had poured into his ministry, only to realize it had all been a carefully orchestrated illusion. In her final address to the church, Esther spoke to the congregation, offering words of wisdom. "My brothers and sisters, this experience has taught me something crucial. Just because someone calls themselves a prophet or a servant of God doesn't mean they are. We must be discerning and vigilant, seeking the truth beyond appearances. Not every church or prayer house represents God's light, and not everyone who claims to be a pastor is genuine." Esther went on to remind everyone that while Kemi's story had cast a dark shadow, it didn't mean all spiritual leaders were deceivers. There are true servants of God, men and women who work tirelessly in humility and sincerity to bring God's love and truth to His people.